Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 18th episode of Genomics Gupshup. This is where we talk to a lot of experts, people who are in genomics and allied fields, to give us their view on what they think about the health and genomics and other things that surround it. So today we have somebody who all of us have been hearing a lot about. Is Mohit Kumar, who's the CEO and founder of Ultrahuman. And welcome to Genomics Gupshup, Mohit.
Thank you for bringing me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about the topic that is close to heart, which is health, human performance, and all those other aspects.
Great. So Mohit, I'm very intrigued by the name itself. Ultrahuman is a very cool name. So how did that come about? Was this something that you gave, or was it a collective effort, or did you all rule out a bunch of things before you all got into Ultrahuman?
All right. So I think the Ultrahuman name was derived from the fact that in the future, people would aspire for peak physical mental performance. And we found that is the epitome, that is the holy grail in terms of how people will look at health. And just like financial excellence, like 30 years back, if you ask people about their aspirations, a lot of these aspirations would be about financial security and even wealth, right? Even today. But I think in the future, this aspiration is going to be somewhere between wealth and also health and health performance. So health performance might actually be very different, which is the ability to actually use your health in a way that it becomes performance, right? So it's not just about avoiding disease, but actually making the best out of your body. And basically aspects like while you're aging, you aged in the best way possible. It might include aspects around visualizing what do you want to do when you actually turn 60 or 70 or 80, right? And starting from there and then actually thinking more with a performance mindset. So all those aspects converged when we were thinking about different names about the brand. And I think one thing that resonated really well was that everybody would try to get a taste of what the Ultrahuman lifestyle would look like. And I think that's why Ultrahuman.
Awesome. So you were in Zomato and you made us eat a lot of food, right? I made that. And then you moved to health. So is food the main thing? Because I remember one of our experts telling us that, a lot of us worry a lot about what we take in as medicines, right? But I think we take less amount of medicine and a lot more amount of food. And we should be more concerned about food. So do you think that somehow from Zomato to when you moved to Ultrahuman, you found that as some sort of a connection between health and food, or was there something else, some other story too?
I think maybe subconsciously, because food does affect, it's your natural environment, and medicines, supplementation, therapies act like catalyst on top of your natural environment. So what I mean is that if you, let's say, go to Mars and don't have the air to breathe, let's say, right? You might be on a top nutraceutical, which is highly beneficial for you, but then you still don't have the air to breathe. So obviously the ecosystem will not work for you, right? It's the same thing with food, because most people, I mean, everybody is almost dependent on food that they eat. So a large part of their health is actually determined by the food that they eat. At Zomato, I think some part of that was definitely a part of the mission, which was, if I think most people don't know this, but I think Zomato's mission used to be better food for more people. It still is better food for more people. There are two statements here, right? Better food and more people, right? And I think Zomato started with more people, which is distribution first, get more people access to the food that they like as much as possible. And I think now with Hyperpure and other initiatives, they're launching better food as well, fixing the supply chain of food. So that was obviously one inherent thought process in the background. The other, you can say, undercurrent was my own fitness journey and my own interest in sports. So I was into cycling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And from
What
both
was
the
that
aspects,
you said? The second part?
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a form of martial arts, and essentially it's different from most other martial arts in the way that it has a very interesting sporting element to it. So you can like that's why it's very modern in nature, and the philosophy around Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is also very modern. It was designed originally for self-defense, but then it works on the principles of leverage. So I think it can be used to sort of like obviously something that is used to defend yourself is also can be leveraged to actually understand different other aspects of your life. So I think those are the two things that sort of like inched me towards the world of fitness and performance, more from a martial arts perspective. I think I realized that a lot of people who are doing this are actually quite self-aware, and self-aware comes with intent. It also comes with data, right? And the data aspect actually intrigued me quite a fair bit, because if we can give people access to data about their own health, it will create curiosity amongst millions of people. Because intent sometimes is situational, it's more dependent on your life events, but then data can actually be democratized. Data can actually be distributed really well. So that was the hypothesis, that can we make health data accessible to people? And the second part of the hypothesis was that it has to be real time in our case. So any biomarker that is not real time um, is something that people. I mean, obviously, we appreciate all the non real time biomarkers, and we feel that those are checkpoints along the way. But the ones that we are building are going to be the ones that are real time in nature. So that's like the focus area of the platform.
So clearly, I think, for Mapmygenome also, I think our tagline says "Know yourself," and we strongly believe that data really motivates. But there is an inherent, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? There is,
Right.
when you measure versus your behavior, do people look at behavior differently when they are measuring versus when they are not? And is it enough to measure it at some time, or you have to constantly keep measuring to be able to get to your goals, that whatever goals that you may have?
It's a little bit of both, is what you've noticed. So I think some data points do need to be looked at once in a while, and you don't need to look at it regularly, right? So, for example, if you track your LDLs daily, it doesn't make any sense. If you track your HbA1c daily, it doesn't really make any sense, because glycation doesn't happen over time. However, if you track your glucose levels in real time, you can understand your environment in a much better way. Not to say that it is conclusive, it's not a conclusive marker of health, but it is a marker of health. It is one of the markers of health. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, curiosity is what will lead to new discoveries in this space, just like any other space. So, what we are trying to create is to help people understand more about their own body uh, by giving them access to their data. Does not mean that we are telling the gospel truth. What we are giving people access is directional pointers. I think people who are chasing their own health understand that their health is complex. It's not a simple. It's not. It can't be solved by a one-shot approach. That hey, just do this, you'll be sorted for life. Because it's a very hard problem to solve. And I think if we approach it with that mindset, I think that is probably the right way. So coming back to the point, some biomarkers could still be 3 month, 4 month, 6 month long. Definitely, the genetic biomarkers could. I mean, I'll leave it up to you to actually address this. But let's say I had personally come across, let's say, telomere length being a marker of aging, and I think if you start doing real longevity work on your body, you might actually see impact in probably a year's time. So I think, and it's still debatable. I know it's a controversial topic, but I think some of those markers are yearly in terms of cadence, but some of these markers could also be quarterly, monthly. Like for example, the glucose biomarker. HRV is certainly a biomarker that changes every day, the heart rate variability with.
And every hour also, sometimes every hour as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that would be a way to think about this probably
So
from
I
our
think,
perspective.
just to address your question on genetic markers, I think there are two, three types of markers, right? So you look at some which are which are not going to change ever, right? So you do it once. So when we do, for instance, a Genomepatri, where we are looking at health risks and all, that even if you did it as a child, that part is not changing at all, right? But your health is really an outcome of your genetics, your behavior, environment, and so on. So I think what your basic genetic, which is the germline markers that you're getting from your parents, that is mostly as a definitive. You can't change it, right? It is something. It is what it is. So you're born with that, and many times it's very useful to know that, because based on that, you can then decide if you need to, go this way or that way in terms of your own health, right? Because then you need to understand. So, for instance, in my case, the reason I'm obsessed with glucose and glucose monitoring is that I do have an elevated risk genetically. I do have a very strong family history. And I think because of that, I think from the beginning, I was a little bit concerned about, glucose, and I used to monitor it regularly. And then I started with with the CGMs a long time back as well. Right? And I think for me, this is something that I'm relatively well aware of. And that's why when I saw what you're doing at Ultrahuman, I got very excited. And now I have been using your app, which is, I think, fantastic. So kudos on building a really user-friendly and brilliant app. Because it's not just about telling you what the glucose is, but it sort of nudges you in the right direction. And that's one of the things that we tell people, that, this is your genetic predisposition and this is your family history. When you put all these pieces together, you are going to get, this is what you need to do. But I think this really helps in closing that loop in terms of how will you do that, right? You got motivated in the first place to be able to start doing something. How do you make sure you continue to build on that, right? And I think it's a fantastic way of being able to do it for a whole bunch of metabolic conditions.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting point that you made, because, there is this counter thesis which says that when you observe your health, you get anxious. And probably there is some truth to it, obviously, right? Just like your Heisenberg principle, and also the Schrodinger's cat in this case, right? So you might end up sort of like disrupting till the point you don't know, right? So there is a famous saying in the world of finance that I think there are two ways to get anxious about your business. I think the first one was to lose money. Second one was to look at your to actually look at numbers that indicate that you're losing money, right? So if you don't want to be anxious about your business, you can choose to not look at data or not lose money, right? One of these two. But that's, I think, in the practical real world, if you choose not to look at data, I think the reality is that some kind of stress is actually invited. It's useful for people to evolve, right? And the reality is that people eventually will figure out, most people figure out when they are progressive in their mindset in terms of how to find the cadence with their own data. If my genetic markers say that I have predisposition to a certain disorder, I can be anxious about it, and maybe get stressed about it. Or I can say that I'll take this in my own hand. I'll be responsible about it, and actually, instead of landing with the problem, I'll actually land with a solution, which is to actually avoid the problem in the first place. So I think that's a fundamental difference, probably.
Yeah, so I think you made an interesting point, because it is not just about, see, if you can have data, you can optimize what you have, right? You can choose to, like you said, look at not lose money, but maybe that's not the most optimum way of keeping your money or making your money grow, for instance, right? Yeah. And I think that's what data does. I think if you look at it in a more normal way, I think you'll be able to figure out that this is something that will actually help you, because no disease, especially metabolic conditions, or even like any of these complex conditions, whether it's cardiac or stroke or anything else, I think a lot of this has to do with what you have done.
Yeah.
Not only blame your parents for giving you the genes, right? I think that is only a small part of what you get. And I often think, as one of our board members puts it, he said, you're born with a bank balance, right? Sometimes you might be born poor, you might be born rich. But there are many instances where you are born rich, but you could still wither the money away, or the other way around, right? So there are many stories where you started with nothing and you were able to get there. So in the genetic lottery, yes, if you are born with something that is much more heritable, where environment and your own behavior doesn't have that much of a real, ability to be able to make a change, then it's a problem. But in most cases, I think, when you take diabetes, only 26% or so is genetic, and the rest of it is all up to you. And so the little small changes that people make, I think that is what really can drive up their health and maybe live up to 120. You think that is possible? Or if
No,
people...
absolutely. I think it's more a lifespan and health span, right? So just yesterday, I was speaking to Dr. Howard Lux, who's essentially basically a longevity scientist in this space. He recently published, and we did a podcast yesterday, and he's talking about that. And I was telling him that longevity is hard work, and he's like, yes, it's hard work, but also simple. There's some aspects that are simple, like some aspects that you can really affect or impact your health in a easy way very quickly, like basically eating whole foods and being more active. Those are simple aspects, maybe harder to execute sometimes given your natural environment, but those are simple. Those are not hard to understand aspects, right? Some complicated elements here would include things like your musculoskeletal health, for example, because the way we it's an interesting aspect that I heard about longevity is that when you think about longevity before 50 and after 50 is very different. Before 50 you don't have I mean, you just want to live, right? And with the same body that you have. But after 50, the body changes and you have a higher risk of falls and musculoskeletal disorders and all those things. And you just then want your body that is pre-50 essentially, right? So I think to your point, in the future with more data and with more iterations, we'll be able to make effective interventions. And the reality is that the world has moved, whatever we say about the world of medicine, and there is this constant tension between functional medicine and traditional, some people call it basically non-functional medicine, just to make fun, and the pharma industry, etc. But I think together we have actually moved in the right direction overall. The What has not happened probably is the non-diseased population qualified as non-diseased, because disease is also a spectrum. How do they actually think about performance has not been solved yet, because there's no payer for that today. There's no reimbursement for that. There's no insurance for that. There is no entity looking at it for natural reasons. Like obviously, you'll prioritize, any nation would prioritize disease over performance. But I think in future, performance will help you understand more and more aspects of disease as well.
Actually, in an ROI, even for a country, if they did invest in prevention or performance, as you call, I think we are likely to have lesser healthcare burden than what it is today. Because I think today the average cost when someone does fall sick is quite exorbitant, right? And I think that's something that people don't understand, that if you are going to be an ostrich and not look, it's not that something like diabetes won't come if you're following bad habits, right? I think that's the challenge that people don't understand, that it is not about discovering whether you found out you have a disease or not. Ultimately, when you find it out in late stages, it is usually a bigger problem and a worse problem, because it's not only that one thing, it has actually spread and created multiple other disorders as well, right? I mean, diabetes will cause many other problems than just having high sugar. And for a lot of people, it's like, I can take a medicine. Medicine doesn't solve your problem entirely, right? I think you have to look at it from how do you solve it so that you don't get, your eye doesn't become a problem, your leg, your nerves and your hearing doesn't become a problem, and so many other things. I think that's the part a lot of people miss out. And
the metabolic disorders are interesting in a way that, because these are chronic disorders, and as we now know that almost 88% of deaths in the world happen because of chronic disorders, and 80% of those are metabolic disorders. We're talking about a huge chunk here. This is an area under the curve problem, right? Which is the more time, like the more number of days I spend where my LDL, HDL ratios are off, my triglyceride ratios are off, my blood glucose is out of control, my inflammatory markers are up. the more number of days and hours I actually spend in that zone is actually you can say affecting my health. And all of these compound, and it actually cannot be reversed by a pill today. It's a I think I heard Peter Attia say in one of the podcasts that exercise today has been proven to be 6 to 7x more effective than the most well-known longevity drug that we actually have, right? So we're not talking about like 2x or 3x, we're talking about 6 7x. So and so, so that's it. That tells you a lot about like how important lifestyle is in this scenario, and how important early intervention is.
Yeah, I remember one of the founders that I met who used to run a very large diabetics chain. And he said that when he first found out about his diabetes, he didn't realize that he was diabetic till he became so bad that he had to go to the doctor and found out that his blood sugar was at 300 or 400, some number that was, and he said he was given everything, except, and in the end, in passing, told that it's also a good idea to walk a little bit, right? And I think over many years, basically what he told me was maybe it was a better idea if I was told that that is a more effective way of actually reversing than just given a pill and then said that it will take care of itself. I think we all have to get out of the mentality that a pill solves everything. It doesn't. I think what it can do is to control it for a small period of time, and you make those lifestyle changes that will allow you to be able to reverse if possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a uh, the last point here is that it's pretty easy and simple to actually avoid when you actually catch it early, or when you actually action early, to be honest, right? There is this concept in sports science called prehab, which I'm fascinated by, which is like if you're in a sport that is increasing your risk for MCL and ACL injuries, we know that healing MCL and ACL is very hard. So why don't you actually train your MCL and ACL? By that I mean that you can't really train your ligaments, but you can actually train the supportive muscles in a way that you're preparing for the injury, preparing for the rehab not to happen, right? And it's a fascinating concept because a lot of athletes are actually actually performing for years and years more because of their prehab routine.
So it's not just about doing that one thing, but also a lot of things that come or support around it, right? And I guess it's true in the case of athletes, it's true in the case of other people as well, right? I mean, if your rest of your body is strong, I think sometimes, if you have a weakness in certain area, also, I think it can be sort of, it sort of balances it out. So in many ways, I think you can understand where your strengths are, where your weaknesses potentially lie, and be able
Right.
to bond it. So let's move on to the sensors, right? I think most people think that Ultrahuman is basically about sensors, right? So what does the sensor do? Although I'm familiar with that, it might help from you to get a view from you in terms of why did you start with glucose monitoring, and what does the sensor really do for an average person?
So the easier answer here is, why did we start with glucose monitoring? The easier, I think the reality is that we are looking for real-time biomarkers, and something that actually looks at a part of your lifestyle that is often ignored. So I think from a data perspective, and I think glucose had the ability to give us unique feedback or insight about your nutrition or your food aspect of your lifestyle. It's not complete, to be honest, right? It's not like if you compare macros and glucose data. Macros is obviously multidimensional and they are rich. It's a rich source of information. Glucose is unidimensional in many ways. I mean, I mean, I can't actually, to be honest, let me correct myself. I can't call it unidimensional because if you look at glucose variability, you get to understand your oxidative stress. If you look at your average glucose over a certain period of time, you get to understand your state of insulin resistance. But then uh, you can say that glucose, the advantage with glucose is that you can see impact of what you do in real time, because glucose is affected by sleep, stress, food, obviously, activity, all those factors as well, right? And when you can see the impact of your lifestyle factors, you can also make real-time interventions. So this habit closure, this loop closure around habit is what we found really interesting, because that's how all habit forming systems are built. If you look at any system that gives you sort of like a dopamine rush, or sort of like all gaming systems, there is a hook which gives you a reward, and then there is effort, and this effort and reward is supposedly balanced, or in some cases imbalanced as well. If the reward is higher than the effort, then obviously people are supposed to repeat much more, much higher. In the case of health and fitness, this is not very clear. You put effort today, and the reward happens maybe like few weeks, few days after, as early as a few days, because you can't really change your body overnight, right? We wanted to change that by giving people rewards much earlier, maybe within minutes. So glucose, because it changes in real time, it has the ability to do that. That's why we started with glucose, and I think the thought process has evolved to include more and more real-time biomarkers. So in the newer version of our hardware, I think you see it here. If not, it's a ring. This is something that we launched recently. We wanted to understand more aspects of your lifestyle in terms of your sleep, HRV, resting heart rate, movement, all those other lifestyle aspects. And when we look at this in combination with glucose, it's obviously a very nice overlap, because you can understand if you are not disposing glucose in a way, what is the reason? Is lack of sleep the reason? Is essentially your ability to move, or movement, is that the reason, or activity, is that the reason? Your stress levels, is that the reason? So I think this is very, very unique, because then we can understand both the cause and the effect. And in the future, I think the biomarkers that we're looking at are markers like lactates, ketones. Uh, Both are interesting from a real-time perspective, probably even alcohol as well.
So it's interesting. I did a poll on LinkedIn to ask, what is that one biomarker, whether it was weight, sleep, glucose, or heart rate variability. Interestingly, almost 50% of the people thought it was sleep. Right now, I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up.
Yeah.
One thing is, I do wear an Apple Watch, and I hate sleeping with it, right? And
Yeah.
I think I would hate sleeping with the ring also, because of my own personal reasons.
Yeah.
Are there any other such things that are coming up, and why is sleep important? And two is, which format of wearables would probably be the one that ultimately will win? And of course, I can be an exception to that rule.
To the second question, I think the answer, we believe, is that the variable that will win eventually is going to be a variable that you don't notice at all, right? It has to be so minimal and something that does not take away your attention, because only then it's a part of a natural lifestyle, right? Something that you can't control, something that is actually affecting your attention focus. Like I'm wearing this massive Apple Watch Ultra right now. I understand totally that you can't really sleep with the watch on, right? And the reality is that it's not designed for this. It's not designed for sleep. It might measure sleep. It's not designed for. And I think one of the key design decisions why we made to go for a ring was to actually make it so minimal, so that you actually, there are no screens, no notifications, no vibrations or anything like that. It's just passively measuring you in the background, and giving you insights when you actually need it, right? So that was the core design thought process. And in the future, our belief is that we will actually design devices that will be more passive in nature, and they'll be part of your natural environment. So for example, it could be the pair of shoes that you're wearing. They actually start measuring, or the sole that's inside your shoe might actually start measuring more and more about your gait. There are interesting ways to understand your foot tension and understand your stress profile. Probably even weight in real time as well. And then there are, let's say, for example, right now I'm sitting on a chair. So that chair could actually measure a certain bunch of biomarkers around my posture, and basically around a bunch of movement parameters, etc. Right? So all those factors. So what we want people to do is essentially live the life that they are doing and be healthy by default, right? If I buy an exercise bike, I have to actually put effort to actually use it, and when I end up using it, I derive benefits, right? And and obviously it's a great tool to get fit as well, but the natural environment is where you spend almost 23 hours of your life daily, right? You probably spend 1 hour exercising, but then 23 hours is spent sleeping, basically eating food, resting, all those aspects, right? And if we can fix those aspects, then we have a much higher chances of compounding all these benefits that you get from these devices into becoming real health outcomes. And that we feel is true democratization of health, because today the devices are designed for convenience. Like this chair is designed for convenience, that I should be comfortably able to sit on it. It's not designed for my posture. This wearables that I'm wearing on my wrist are not designed for long-term usage and minimalism, right? So that it does not affect my typing, it does not affect me while I'm sleeping, right? So I think it will become more and more pro health or pro lifestyle, pro healthy lifestyle. Objects will become more and more of that. Your bed might actually become smarter tomorrow. So I think all those are realities.
So before we get there, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what is healthy versus not, right? And I think healthy is also different for different people. Just like, depending on my genetic predisposition and my lifestyle, I might, something else might be healthier for me than others. So have you noticed anything, if you all have analyzed the bigger data in terms of what are the general misconceptions around health or healthy foods? And have you all found anything interesting over there?
Okay, so see, the usual ones are pretty straightforward, right? So the food industry today has very little amount of segregation between what what is marketed as healthy and what is potentially not as unhealthy for people, right? So and I think the food industry has really played with the spectrum here. So health is a spectrum. So just like disease is a spectrum, health is also a spectrum. So if you can say that today that jaggery is better than sugar, most people will start thinking that, oh yes, it is healthy, but does it
Wheat
mean that
laddu.
it will not? Absolutely. Jaggery laddus, are they better than sugar laddus? People, you can still assign that tag from a factual perspective and say that, yeah, it's healthy, but healthy by how much? Is it healthier by 5%, 3%, 4%? Most people, when you ask them, they'll say, oh, it's like there's this funny incident that I recall, that I met a user and I was asking them that how's it going, and the response that I got was, yeah, yeah, I'm living a great lifestyle. I'm off sugar the last 1 year. I'm just consuming like as minimal sugar as possible and exercising every day. And I was like, okay, that's great. And what sort of food do you eat generally? And like, oh, I take my tea with jaggery. And then like, okay, that's sugar. Like, no, 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 that's not sugar, that's jaggery. And the box says that 0% sugar, 100% jaggery. He showed me a box, and it said 0% sugar, 100% jaggery. And I was like, but jaggery is sugar. So what does it really mean? And does it not spike your glucose? Like it does, but I think I ignore it because it's jaggery. So I think I mean, there are various such incidents. Like another one is specifically around grains. So there are certain grains marketed as extremely healthy. And what people fail to understand is that healthy is also in context, right? So grain is energy, it's starch, it's energy, it's carbohydrates in many scenarios. And if I'm using the energy that I'm consuming, grains are inherently not bad or carbs are not bad. But I'm not using like these grains, like for example, in this case, I'm talking about ragi, uh, like essentially high GI grain, and essentially keeps my glucose above a certain range for a long, long time. So it is a great fuel for actually endurance activities, right? And during my cycling days, I actually realized that I can fuel myself on ragi malts all day long. For me that was healthy, but I think somebody who's going to chug in a ragi malt, you can say an entire jug, and sort of like sit in front of the computer and think that they have done something healthy, that is actually wrong. So I think the context and the I think the understanding is missing to some extent. That's why I think the way we can solve it probably is by making more people curious. Because if we say another thing, let's say we do a campaign tomorrow saying jaggery is equal to sugar. So that's another propaganda from our side, just like any other like you go to like supermarket, there are 80 such propagandas that you'll find. Heart healthy oil. All of these are like, I don't know from what perspective, but I think if we ask people to, or get people to ask relevant questions to understand a little bit about the science in this space, I think uh, people will take the right decisions for themselves.
True, I fully agree. I think there are, many times, when you eat, what you eat, and what you do after that is also an important thing. That's why one of the features I love in the app that you have is the one that tells you that today you need to take rest, and then some days you need to do a better, higher exercise. And I think those are great inputs for people to be nudging and making sure that you when you're fueled up, that you actually go and expend that energy in a way that will be healthy for you. But also, I think everybody is obviously different, and I think you were talking a little bit about telomeres in the in a previous converse in the a few minutes ago, and telomeres is one of the ways to do it. But I think the more better way to measure it is also to look at methylation of of the data that is there. Telomeres was obviously is a rage in some parts, but I think there are newer ways that are coming up as well. And I think that will be interesting. I think I'm just waiting for the costs to go down to be able to actually make that something that we can make available to the average consumer, just like we have with Genomepatri and Medicamap and many other such tests. So I think so. Who is your average customer? Is it somebody who is pre-diabetic? Is it somebody who's normal? Is it somebody who's a diabetic already? Or is it somebody who's an athlete? I mean, I don't know. Can you maybe throw some light on who your...
Sure. So I think today the focus of the platform is to go after people who do recreational fitness activities. So anybody who's trying to play sports on the weekend, trying to do any activity, trying to stay active, be healthy, avoid disease, all those are categories, and there are like micro segmentations within each of these as well. But I think we have seen a massive amount of love from the sporting community, right? The sports is a huge category for us. It does not mean only professional athletes who play sport. People who play sports are also like people who are trying to find a competitive activity, or sports as a healthy lifestyle, right? So I think today we are extremely focused on sports as a category. Uh, we do see a lot of people actually who are pre-diabetic and as well as non-diabetic who are trying to lose weight to use the platform as well. I think one of the aspects that we have seen works really well in people in their favor is that the first thing that happens is when people stabilize their glucose levels, they just feel more energetic. That's because when glucose levels crash, you obviously feel lethargic, right? So when that stabilizes, you feel more energetic. I think it changes the game for you because you want to do things, right? You want to be out there. You don't fall in this trap of glucose crash, caffeine, and then another glucose crash, and then caffeine, and so you get yourself out of a little bit out of that downward spiral and sort of start getting into activities. So those are the folks that we actually go after today to educate them. I think generally people start getting curious about their health when they are 31, 32, 33 is what we have seen. Curious because by default, they cannot now like abuse their sleep, abuse their food, abuse their recovery, right? So I think the same pizza in 20s and 30s is very different, right? Insulin sensitivity has just like been very, very different. So how do we get people to I mean, the goal is not to avoid the pizza, but the goal is to actually prepare your body to sort of like handle the same pizza, to increase your glucose tolerance, improve your glucose tolerance. So I think that's the point around addressable market that we're going after.
So I think let's move a little bit to genetics, and I know we are almost getting close to an hour. So if we look at, there are lots of different kinds of tests that you can do from a genetics point of view. One is, and since you've used the word curiosity a lot of times, I think, we have to send you a t-shirt which says curiosity is in my DNA.
Wow.
Those are our, like,
Really cool.
our Mapmygenome t-shirts. But so there is one which is I like to say that is more for the curious minded, right? Like the people who want to know where they came from, or why do they look the way they look, or why do they behave the way they behave. Those are things that I think are driven out of curiosity. The second could be, I have certain goals. I want to lose weight. I want to, I want to understand how I can perform better. I want to understand, similarly, like what you just said, those are more consumer specific goals that they have. And then you have one where you're looking at the whole range of like the profiles for drugs, where you're understanding different drugs, whether they're likely to work for you. And I think one case, for instance, a lot of times where athletes and others might end up using would be something like a statin, for instance, right?
Yeah.
They might naturally have high triglycerides because of genetics or various other things. And in order to manage that, they usually, especially in their 50s, are likely to be prescribed a statin, right? But statin can be very bad for some people based on their genetic profile. And then you have obviously the clinical test where you're looking at cancer treatment, or any of the other treatment purposes, or pharmacogenomics. So in the big wide spectrum of interesting tests that genetics can really tell you, what excites you the most, and have you done a genetic test in the first place?
Well, I've certainly done like I think some tests around methylation, telomeres. I think also a little bit on the genetic predisposition to disease um, from a food panel perspective as well, right? Food sensitivity, etc. I think so. I did my tests at 3 layers. One is the genetic layer. Second is microbiome, and then third is metabolites. These are the 3 layers that we generally looked at, and then of course all the real-time biomarkers are always on. What I found interesting about genetics is the fact that I could figure out my 80-20 in this case. So I could say that, okay, there are so many possibilities in life, right? Predisposition to arthritis, disposition to other disorders as well, or basically osteo conditions, etc. Here are 3 things that I need to focus upon. In my case, it turned out to be all around mostly musculoskeletal disorders, given like essentially family history and all of those. So what I did was I tried to understand like the existing work in this space, right? And specific around the cervical region, and basically like more around the ligaments and tendons, essentially like higher risk profile. And basically there was one paper that I read that a certain type of genes actually express higher risk from a tendon depletion perspective. So if I got that wrong, like basically tendons deplete over time. So I didn't really understand what it really means, but overall, essentially higher risk profile from my tendons and bone density perspective in the future. So what I did was I tried to understand like strength training is going to be key from a lifestyle perspective for me. Like whatever happens, I have to work on my strength training capabilities, and that has to be 80%, and then 20% could be cardiovascular conditioning and other things. So that was one key affirmation. I tried to work on the food aspect as well, but then I found that food is you can say like the foods that were supposed to be avoided and I wanted to include, there was a little bit of non-overlap in terms of like the foods that I liked were also in the foods that I need to avoid. And some of these were also behaving okay for me in terms of the response. And I felt that your existing metabolic body is something that also counterbalances the genetic predisposition that you have. So I think that insight I took with my own judgment and existing other data. The predisposition to disease is what I focused really well on. Telomere tests, I have done 3. My goal was that in all 3 tests, I should potentially not age or reverse age. And I think not age, uh, I think was a very practical goal, uh, because I was starting from a point where I hadn't focused on any of those aspects essentially, and I was now putting in specific interventions. So I think for if I look at 2020, 2021, and 2022, all 3 years I've done one telomere test, and I think from that perspective, my age has remained the same across 3 years. So which I found as success for myself, like saying that, like, yes, if you're not aging, means you're reverse aging in some ways.
Well, that's awesome. And I think maybe we'll get to a point where it'll become something that's easily available for everyone, especially in India and other countries. But I think we'll have to do it in combination. I think longevity is a little bit. I guess we'll find out more and more as we go along. But as I was recently having a discussion with someone saying that aging is a disease, just like diabetes and others. And I think we all have to understand that and make sure that, as you grow older, that you do the things to counter, just like you would do things to counter, from a prevention point of view for diabetes and others. And I think, your lifestyle is the biggest and the most important piece of getting there. So anyway, those are some of the things. And I think there are many ways that if we can get data that combines both the things that don't change and things that change, I think that strikes the perfect balance for people to be able to actually make those habit forming changes that are necessary to optimize their health. And one of the things that we started adding was, we said, we're doing the genetic analysis. We are taking their lifestyle and their family history and their food history and sleep and alcohol and all of that into account before recommending something. But if we can now put in parameters that will sort of be more changeable, right? So for instance, your blood test, it'll show you what's going on with your HbA1c or something like, what you're measuring on a daily basis, hourly basis. I think those can really help people to sort of make those little changes, and those tiny steps done on a regular basis are likely to actually make big differences in people's lives. So I don't know if you want to add anything else on future or where we'll see ultra-human go. Will it become ultra-human or?
No, absolutely. I think the in the future, I think what we're going to see for sure is all the work that's getting done in this space will get unified. And what that means is that my genetic data, my metabolic data, my you can say my activity data, my recovery data, my sleep data, all of these should be possible to like centralize, visualize, correlate in one interface, one platform, one capability essentially. And I think that's going to be key for newer observations and discoveries to happen. So because what we're in a world where I think trials obviously take a lot of time, and to arrive at a hypothesis and to prove it and to design a pill. Obviously, because a pill is going to be designed, a pill is usually not personalized per se, right? So it has to be tested for safety and it has to be sampled across millions of people. So it will naturally take time because it's getting designed for millions of people. What we're talking about is the era of personalized lifestyle, and this could actually be done by much more ground level, or you can say closed loop personalization. It does not require, it should not in the future require a clinical trial that should last 5 years or 10 years, because if you do like 20 clinical trials that are linear in nature and one after the other, you need 100 years to actually uh, basically do any significant movement. But I think what we will have is that in the future, because of us and you, people would be running millions of versions of their own health algorithm of their own, right? These are all, think of these as different personalized pills that they are consuming in their own life. Pills replace it by lifestyle, something that really works for them. And these are all million experiments running in parallel and sort of like getting validated by their own data. Uh, so I think that's what we feel is going to be a crucial aspect of the future.
Great. So let me move on to the final segment of this, which is about Mohit, not ultra-human. But I'll ask you 3 simple rapid fire questions. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire. Heart rate variability or glucose? What would you prefer? If you have to choose one.
Glucose.
Okay. Do you prefer reading a book or watching a movie?
Watching a movie.
And which subject were you the worst at in school?
Many, but I think mostly languages. Uh,
Languages. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I think I grew into languages eventually, so I started enjoying them very, very late. And in the early days, I couldn't really understand why, why would I need to learn more than one language?
So
So,
how many do you speak now?
um,
A few.
I think five overall, because two native, three, one. So did my schooling across various cities. I can't say five actually, three to be honest, and then two is what I understand. Um, and yeah, but I did spend a lot of time hating languages.
I love languages. So I'm now learning many more new languages this year also. I think so. I'm trying
Wow.
to learn some French and Spanish along with. So Duolingo is now my one of my favorite tools to use. But I anyway had to learn a few languages because I'm from Rajasthan. I grew up in Bengal. I married a South Indian from Hyderabad. So those were normal. But
Yeah,
then obviously you have to learn English and some of the other languages. But
yeah,
I think it's fun because ultimately when you learn more, you realize that there's so much interesting things about origins. And I think that's what is exciting.
you're
But
predisposed to learning more cultures basically.
I
So
think
yeah,
so. I think so.
yeah,
I think it's about, all of us are curious in different ways. So this is one of one area that also I'm curious about. I'm obviously very curious about health and I keep using your
wow,
the
amazing.
the, the Ultrahuman the patch over here. But I'm looking forward to the ring, even though I'm not a big ring person. But I am looking forward to trying that out, and hopefully we'll be able to see how to combine all these pieces together. And we did a very good thing with cardiac conditions already with blood markers and some of the other things. And I'm hoping we'll be able to connect these pieces together, which is a lot more data than having data that comes every month or 2 months or 3 months, but rather
Right.
every minute, every hour, and seconds. So I think that's the exciting part, right? So,
That sounds super interesting.
so thank you, Mohit. It was really wonderful chatting with you, and
Likewise.
all the best for Ultrahuman. And I'm hoping that there's some way we'll put these pieces, you know, for the consumer's benefit.
No, absolutely. I look forward to working on this together. I think this is a really interesting space. And as I mentioned, I really look forward to the t-shirt as well.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
I think curiosity is what binds us truly. And I think we look forward to doing more interesting work with you in this space.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mohit.
All right. Thank you.